Hey guys, PIEGUYRULZ here, and it's time to head on down to South Park, because I have a bone to pick. So I love South Park, I really do. I think it's one of the funniest and most original shows out there. And it's because I'm such a big fan that I feel the need to call it out when I think it deserves to be called out. And if there's one element of South Park that I think has really been dragging it down lately, it's the story arcs. So, for most of its life, South Park has been a pretty episodic show. It's definitely had some pretty strong continuity, and there are episodes that are definitely sequels to other episodes, but in its first 17 seasons, it was mostly episodic. The only real season-long story arc that they'd ever done was in season 6, when they had killed Kenny off for real, and then Cartman ate Kenny's ashes, and Kenny was haunting Cartman, and eventually Kenny comes back. That was the only season-long story arc. And it didn't appear in most episodes, and even in the episodes it appeared in, it was only mentioned and only the focus of about 1 or 2 episodes. In season 18, things changed a little bit though. Although the episodes were still relatively episodic, there were several story arcs that were reoccurring throughout the whole season, with the most prominent being Randy's secret identity as Lord. Yeah. The 2-part finale of season 18 was weird and rushed, and didn't really do a great job of bringing the story arc to a close. But, like I said, most season 18 episodes were relatively episodic, with some episodes having nothing to do with the Lord story arc at all. Which brings us to season 19, which is where I think this problem really started. This season decided to tie its story arc into every episode and have it be very prominent. Although each episode did have its own focus, it was heavily connected to the overall theme of South Park becoming more PC, with there being 3 episodes at the end of an only 10 episode season that were exclusively about this story arc. And personally, I think those episodes were kind of awful. Despite having 3 episodes, somehow they failed to explain a majority of exactly what was going on, and tried to shoehorn in other subjects into these episodes, which were already pretty bloated from just trying to tell this overly complicated, weird story. Which, honestly, if it was a little bit more focused, could have been done in 2 episodes. Another problem that came with having most of the season be focused on this story arc is that they didn't get to cover quite as many topics as they ordinarily would have. You get a lot of parodying of PC culture and SJWs and all that sort of thing. And by the end of it, I was just ready for them to move on to a new topic. After watching season 19, I was really hoping South Park would just stop having story arcs. It was an interesting experiment, but I liked the episodes a lot better when they were standalone. I don't really mind story arcs in the sense of season 6 or season 18, because that is really just 1 or 2 plot threads that run across several episodes, but season 19 having everything tied into this one story arc that was trying to tell this big epic story at the end and completely fell flat on its face with the last episode, yeah, that was different. I didn't want to see that again, and I'd hoped they'd learn their lesson. Oh, and by the by, season 19 was the first season in a long time to have no episode break 2 million viewers on initial airing. And that brings us to season 20. This season was advertised well in advance, with this really nice ad about how South Park was there for you throughout all the years, and how season 20 is coming. And while I guess this ad does tie into the whole member storyline, I was kinda hoping this meant that South Park wasn't gonna do a story arc, and instead was going to do some stuff that, I don't know, celebrated the show's 20-year history? Unfortunately, instead of getting something that was less story arc heavy, we got one of the most story arc heavy seasons that I've ever seen. After I watched the first 2 episodes of season 20, I didn't want to watch anymore. I could already see where this was going, and how I was not going to like it. But, of course, I'm curious, and so I decided to wait until the entire season was over, and then watch all the episodes back to back. And I'm willing to bet I got a lot more enjoyment out of watching it that way than if I had been watching week to week. And that's because every single episode, aside from the finale, had a cliffhanger. Every one. Some of them were smaller than others, but they all had cliffhangers. None of them, again, bearing the finale, had any resolution to anything I had seen in the previous half hour, which does a few things. First of all, it frustrates me as a viewer because I don't feel satisfied. You can do a story arc and have an ongoing story and still have a resolution at the end of your episode. It doesn't have to resolve everything, but you could resolve, I don't know, maybe one plot line that happened in the episode, or have at least a partial resolution to something. But almost none of them do. Almost every single storyline that was introduced isn't wrapped up until the very last episode. Outside of being kind of frustrating to watch cliffhanger after cliffhanger after cliffhanger, this means that to really get any full experience experience out of any episode in the season, you pretty much have to see them all. Because of how heavily story arced the whole thing is, you're only ever gonna get a really small piece of the puzzle with no ending if you were to watch any given episode. The other thing these constant cliffhangers do is put a lot of pressure on the last episode. Because it's not like it's just an episode, it's not like it's just a season finale. This is the ending to all of the stories that you've been telling me over 9 other episodes. It's like watching a 3.5-hour movie. You really expect that last half hour to be dang good. And let me tell you right now, it wasn't. And another problem with splitting up all of these ideas into a long story arc instead of just having one episode about each one is that the messages and points of each of these stories are completely lost. South Park is known for giving speeches and making points that are legitimately good and enjoyable to watch because they're told through these really funny and silly ways, and a lot of them are just kind of common sense things that a lot of people apparently forget. By the end of this season, I have no idea what the show is trying to say about trolling, about internet anonymity, about the war of boys versus girls and girls being funny. I really don't know what the message behind any of the stuff they were saying because there's just so much going on. It also really works against South Park's favor because the show is not meant to be taken super seriously. A lot of the stuff that happens is weird and outlandish and is supposed to be like that because of satire. And usually that works out really well. You watch an episode and you're okay with a lot of the stupid things that happen because they're intentionally stupid for the sake of comedy or making a point. But with a story that goes on for 10 episodes, you kind of have to take it more seriously because at that point you're very invested. And if it ends with a stupid reroute all the power into everything to somehow make the internet explode and magically reset all the problems, yeah, I'm just not gonna buy it. If that had been the ending to a singular episode, maybe I would have, depending on the circumstances, but not a 10-episode story arc. But here's the real problem. South Park is written and made in 7 days. And while I'm sure maybe they planned a few things out in advance of directions that these stories were going to take, they very clearly did not map out every episode in the season and have any clue where a lot of these storylines were going. There's a severe lack of foreshadowing earlier in the season, and a lot of plot lines and characters just kinda come from left field. And that's not good writing. Yes, you can make a very funny show in 7 days, but to write this intense of a 10-episode long, heavily story-arced show, it's insane to try to do it in that time. It just doesn't work, and it shows. So many things were left unexplained or just kind of hanging. And the ending is an incredibly weak reset button. And with such a short time span to write the episodes, they have to focus on the story. Otherwise, the story turns into a complete mess. Which it kinda did, but I suppose it could have been worse. But you know what gets lost when you have to focus that much time and attention to the story? The comedy. I did not find the first few episodes of this season to be funny in the slightest. And though later episodes did have some good jokes in there, these were not episodes that were packed to the brim with comedy. And unfortunately, a lot of the better jokes they had kinda got repeated. The member berries kept saying the same things about Star Wars again and again, among other repeated gags like a Rickroll happening in multiple episodes. And another problem that comes with this story arc thing when it comes to South Park's production schedule, they wrote the story arc as if Hillary Clinton won the election in real life, and that didn't happen, which means they had to rewrite their story very fast. And majorly changing plans like that midway through a story arc is not a good idea. They didn't even want to do the Garrison thing, but they felt like they had to because of how real-life events played out. To just give one example of a story arc that just doesn't work when you look at the whole picture of all of these episodes, it's member berries. You know, the focus of the first episode. They get about one shot in the very last episode, and that is it. No thorough explanation of where they come from, what their purpose was, why they're trying to get us to member. There was some half-hearted explanation about J.J. Abrams and rigging the election and Star Wars, but they never actually resolve it or explain it or confront whoever was behind it if it really was J.J. Abrams or George Lucas or whoever. And sure, you could tell me, well, they're obviously going to continue the member berries into next season and do something with them. And hey, that might very well be true, but look at what happened last season. Yes, PC Principal is back this season, but none of the weirdness with the ads and is he an ad? Is he a real person? Was he taken over by ads? None of those questions were actually answered. They didn't follow up on it. And heck, even if they do follow up on it next season, too little too late. You had 10 episodes that were all focused on these story arcs, and you couldn't resolve the one you introduced in episode 1? You'll also notice that certain things kind of shift as the episodes go on. At first, the member berries just kind of talk, and then later on, they're apparently just full creatures that can do whatever they want and have their own agenda and mobsters and all that. And the troll tracking site was changed from being something that let you look up any comment and find whoever did it to something where you could just type someone's name and social security number in and then you get all of their information at once. It's inconsistent and sloppy writing and wouldn't happen if you planned it out in advance. And you know what really sucks about this story arc? There are a lot of good ideas in here. The member berries aren't a bad idea. Talking about The Force Awakens isn't a bad idea. Cartman totally flip-flopping and constantly saying that girls are funny, get over it, and having a girlfriend, that's a good idea. Danish people fighting internet trolls? Yeah, that's great. But because all of these ideas were mashed together and constantly being flipped between in every episode, and some of them not getting a resolution at all, and others of them getting a really weak resolution in the last episode, it really cheapens what are good ideas because of how split the focus of these episodes are. And meanwhile, you had the 2016 election, which would have been great material for an original episode, but of course it had to be tied into this story arc in a way that I feel like is a lot worse than if they had just done one straightforward episode about Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump running for president against each other. There are good ideas in here, and I did enjoy parts of this, but the first few episodes and the last few episodes are total messes, and everything else in between gets totally jumbled up and lost in the shuffle. I have a great respect for Matt, Trey, and all of the people who work on South Park, and that is why I'm getting so passionate about this, because I think they are really good at comedy and telling these really funny satirical stories. But please, no more story arcs. Or at least nothing anywhere near as heavy as this one. In episode 9 of season 20, Not Funny, Kyle does actually acknowledge this, saying that South Park used to solve its problems and then move on, and how he's getting sick of hearing about the same thing over and over. And the finale, episode 10, is called The End of Serialization as We Know It, with serialization being another term for a continuing story or a story arc. So I'm really hoping that they took a look at a lot of the feedback that they were getting on this season and the idea of story arcs in South Park, and have decided that they're just gonna go back to just episodic shows. I feel really weird arguing this point because I really do like ongoing stories. I think that they are much more rewarding when done well than just an individual episode. But when done poorly, it can make me want to skip an entire season when rewatching the show. I applaud the people behind South Park for trying something different and new, but a part of mixing up the format is also looking back and realizing when it just doesn't work. And season 20 especially has proven to me that this sort of story arc does not work for South Park. I've seen other people share the way I feel about this on the Reddit and in other places, and I've also seen other people getting upset with that first group of people and saying things like they're just being nostalgia blind and whiny and taking it too seriously and whatever. All I can say to that is that South Park was founded on calling out things that suck. And if season 19's Tweak and Craig proved anything, it's that the people behind South Park actually do care about what the fans do and think about the show. I highly doubt Matt and Trey would want people to cut them some slack or say the show is good if it's not. South Park is one of the kings of brutal honesty, so I think it's only fair to criticize it as harshly as it criticizes everything else. And hey, at least the Fractured But Whole's coming out soon. If it's anything like The Stick of Truth, it's bound to be amazing. And with that, Pie Guy rules.